It's early in the morning and the air is crisp. The sky is still holding on to the darkness of night, and you blink yourself awake. Lacing up your shoes, you press play on your favorite playlist, and you allow the music to fill your ears as you step out into the quiet. It is the same exact thing that you have done countless times. But as your feet hit the pavement, a thought creeps in. What if I don't make it home? If you have ever tightened your grips on your keys, scanned your surroundings not once, but multiple times, turned to look over your shoulder, ran faster, shared your location, or desperately searched for someone else to be nearby, you are not alone. For too many women, the simple act of running, of reclaiming peace, strength, and freedom has ended in tragedy. These are women who have trained hard, loved harder, and they are more than just victims. Their vanished footsteps echo a reality that is rarely spoken, yet always on our minds. Fear is a companion that many women carry on every single run. Welcome to Girl Gone Running, a Tragedy with a View series where I will tell you stories of the women who went out for a run and never came home. It is not about her death, it is about her life, the voice she no longer has, and the warning signs that we can't afford to ignore. Because what happened on these days was not a random act. And as we dig deeper, we find it changes everything. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hello. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. I am your host, Kayla. We are segueing into a serial killer episode, so please pay attention to those who are around you. Be aware that this content is not for little ears. For this episode, we are working our way to the Ellicott Creek Bike Path, running 6 miles along, mostly along Ellicott Creek. Ellicott Creek inside of Buffalo, New York. Most of the trail has a dense line of woods on one side and this calming view of the creek on the other. With the trail being 6 miles long, it is perfect for those looking to get out and stretch their legs, just like Linda Yalem was doing on the afternoon of September 29th, 1990. At 22 years old, Linda was an eager and energetic student at the University of Buffalo, where she lived in the dorms at Richmond Quad, which was a stone's throw from the bike path. She pressed play on her cassette player where she was listening to Tears for Fears and took off for a run north along the bike path. She only ran during the day for her own safety. Being around others or in the vicinity of others helped her to feel safe. Her dark auburn hair swished and bounced as she ran, as she had it cut short enough that she didn't need to pull it back unless she really wanted to. Linda was happy and she pushed herself hard on this run. Because she wasn't just going for a run. She was training for the New York City Marathon. One of the big 6 marathons, this race is considered one of the most prestigious marathons in the world. There are minimums for which you need in order to qualify to even sign up to run the marathon. And even then, you don't always get a spot at the start line. But Linda did, and it was only a few weeks away. This was her last big week of training before things would start to back off, letting her recover before a race day. And she had been training for this race for over a year. When she wasn't in class or studying, she was running. Only she would never see the start line. Linda was running down the path when suddenly something flashed in her peripheral, near a stand of trees. She had her music turned up loud, so she wasn't alerted to anything based on sound. What this was, though, was a rope, and it was now around her neck. Linda was yanked from the path and into the brush and down near an embankment. Her windpipe was being crushed from the rope, so her screams were near silent. No one could hear her. No one except for Al Sanchez. Now, Al will become known as the Bike Path Killer of Buffalo, New York. Stick with me here. This episode is a bit different in format than the others. Al grew up pretty powerless, and this would end up creating a need for control, and it's this need for control that would carve deep inside his behavior, which we will see displayed over and over again. Al was born Altemio Sanchez in San Sebastian, Puerto Rico in January of 1958. He had 3 older siblings, a brother and 2 sisters, and his parents, who were Al Sanchez Sr. and Lucy Caraballo. When Al was 2 years old, his father would abandon the family, and this prompted his mother to take her 4 children and leave Puerto Rico. They first settled in Miami, Florida, before Lucy uprooted the family again to move them to North Collins, New York, a very different place from Puerto Rico or Florida, and finally they moved to Buffalo in the mid-1960s. So all of these moves happened in a 5-year period. Along this line, Lucy had several boyfriends, some on and off again types, and while most were fine, when Al was 12 years old, she began dating a man who was abusive towards her and her children as well. Lucy was an alcoholic. She was verbally abusive towards her children, and thanks to a multitude of studies over the years, we recognize that abusive behavior towards children leads to a 53% increase in behavioral issues in those children. An example of this behavior is where they are acting out in ways that get them noticed by different authorities. Further, there is a 38% increase in potential that this behavior extends into adulthood and will likely be arrested for violent crimes. So we know that Al was being abused by someone in his home and that his mother was letting it happen. Not only that, but she was also partaking in some of the abuse. And then as a young teenager, Lucy threw the bomb at him that she never wanted him. When she found out she was pregnant, she had tried to have him aborted by taking medicine that was supposed to terminate the pregnancy, and this clearly did not work. And while many women, partners, and families consider abortion as an option when life is heavy and a child is thrown into a mix, Al felt betrayed and unwanted. And this caused his life to spiral in ways that his siblings did not have to deal with. In 1978, when Al started classes at Buffalo State College, he was noted to be a loner. He would play basketball, sometimes he was noticed in class, but otherwise he just stayed by himself. This would change when a woman walked up to Al one day and mentioned to him that her friend Kathleen was interested in him. While he had never considered the potential of approaching a woman to date, this sparked curiosity in him. And so he did go up and talk to Kathleen. Their relationship blossomed quickly. When Kathleen found out she was pregnant, Al dropped out of school and they got married on June 5th, 1980. And their first son, Christopher, was born in October of the same year. But Al was not handling stress of family life well. While he had held his anger in check with Kathleen and the kid, he certainly didn't maintain the same reaction for others. There would be times after Christopher was born that Al would attack women, holding them against the ground while he thrust against them, displaying his unchecked anger and sexual assault issues. And he recognized these. He was aware that what he was doing was wrong, but he also didn't seek out help for how to manage these urges. Shortly before their second son was born, he was finding that just grinding against women was not satisfying this need he had in him anymore, so he decided to escalate things. On April 14th, 1981, Al left home and went to Delaware Park. He dressed like he was going for a jog, and as he slowly ran along the path, he noticed a 21-year-old woman whose name has not been released. As they passed each other on the trail, Al grabbed her by the collar, threatening her with a knife, and then he took her into an area that was surrounded by bushes and trees and raped her. She would report this, but in 1981, there was little the police had to go on. But it was 3 days later, when she was at the mall with her sister, that she saw him. He was holding hands with Kathleen, and when their eyes met, they both recognized each other. This time, the woman didn't go quietly. She made a fuss to her sister while Al rushed Kathleen and Christopher to their car, and it was as they were driving away that she noted, He was driving a blue Oldsmobile, 1975 model, and she was able to write down the license plate number. Again, she called police, and when they followed up on the report, they tracked down the car and found the owner. They found who this person was, they found out where he lived, and they decided to go visit the home of Wilfred Caraballo. In short, he was ruled out after the woman saw him and said that that was not who had raped her. And while the case went cold, this is because we have a tiny bit of information that the police did not have. Does that last name sound familiar? Lucy Caraballo's, Al's mother, was also the sister of Wilfredo, and he knew that Al had borrowed his car for that day. While Wilfredo did confront Al, we don't know what was said or how much of the truth was told, but nothing changed. Well, some things changed. As the years go by, Al is a husband and a dad and a hard worker for his family and his employer. He keeps his anger at bay, and when he needs a release, he heads to Delaware Park, where his process becomes more refined. Instead of using a knife, and he begins to tell his victims that his name is David. In July of 1984, he attacks yet another woman who caught the attention of the city's Commissioner of Human Resources, William Byers. She got his attention because the day before the attack, he had been in the park and was watching a man who was just kind of acting weird. He was identified as in his late 20s, out of shape, with dark hair, sideburns, and a thin mustache. And this description matched who they were allegedly calling the Delaware Park Rapist. But again, they don't have much to go on, so this case goes cold as well. A year later, William Byers sees Al while eating breakfast at a diner. He follows the man out of the restaurant where he writes down the license plate number and hands it over to police. Again, police track it down and find Anthony Capozzi, who looks nearly identical to Al. Anthony lived with his parents and suffered from schizophrenia. He was unable to hold a steady job, and while he struggled with hallucinations, many people recognized him as an oddly behaving man who frequently walked around town. Police entered the home searching for clothing that Al had been described in and a handgun. But finding neither, they left him. The next day, they brought Anthony in for a lineup with 3 of Al's victims, and all 3 identified Anthony. While there were some differences, like that Anthony had a scar on his forehead that none of his victims reported, and he also weighed about 50 pounds more than Al, this didn't give the police any pause as they arrested and then charged Anthony with 3 counts of rape. He was held in jail for his trial, and still, the rapes continued. It was this continuation of the crime that had people asking, like the juror who asked the prosecution on September 19th, 1985, why the semen was not being compared to Anthony's blood type. There actually had not been any DNA testing at all for a match, which, while DNA was still a new subject matter for crimes, the DA, or the defense attorney, told her it was not standard in this case. And even with the questions on February 6th, 1987, Anthony was found guilty on 2 counts of rape, sodomy, and sexual abuse, being sentenced to 11 to 35 years in state jail. And still, the rapes continued. It was during one of those times that a victim fought back with everything she had. So much so that it scared Al into wondering what would happen if she had gotten his gun or knife. So he changed tactics again by using a rope. Now, using this rope, he found brought him more satisfaction, and especially as he watched the women struggle to breathe. He used it for the first time on June 12, 1986, where he attacked a 44-year-old woman. He wrapped the cord so tight around her neck that the blood vessels in her eyes burst as she was trying to breathe. But she survived. And now, with this new method, police were able to start seeing a pattern that they hadn't noticed before. All while Anthony is still locked away. They found that the attacks occurred only in the summer months, each about 1 month apart, and only 3 attacks each year. They also found that the attacks occurred between 7 a.m. and 12 p.m., perfectly lining up with when Al would get off of his third shift job. And then when he and Kathleen moved, the location of the attacks also moved from Delaware Park to Amherst along the Willow Bridge Bike Path, which, you guessed it, is near the Ellicott Creek Bike Path. A 14-year-old girl was raped on August 24th, 1989. A 33-year-old woman was raped on May 31st, 1990. And then he attacked Linda Yalem. Linda was a communications major and a sophomore at the University of Buffalo. She had moved to New York from Thousand Oaks, California, so that she could be closer to her sister who lived in New York City. The Ellicott Creek Bike Path cut right through campus, so this was easy access for her. Just after noon, when she set off, she felt safe and wasn't worried. But the campus hadn't told their students about the two rapes that had occurred during daylight near campus. She had on white running shoes, a t-shirt that said "Run Like Hell," and her cassette player. As she ran, Al stepped out from nowhere, wrapped the cord around her neck, and then drug her 40 yards into the dense vegetation. He pulled out 2 pieces of duct tape, which he taped over her nose and mouth, which formed the shape of a cross, but still Linda fought back. As she fought, Al tightened the cord around her neck and watched as she struggled to breathe due to the tape blocking her airways. She actually sucked so hard that the tape was pulled into her nostrils, which was done with so much force that the blood vessels broke internally. It is unclear if Al intended to murder Linda when he grabbed her, but we can all agree that her death was not slow. He watched her struggle to breathe for several minutes before she finally passed out and then died. Al left the scene knowing that it would not be long before someone came looking for her. And look for her they did. At 9:30 p.m., when her friends realized that she never came home, they called police and college security, all of which went looking for her. Detective Joe LaCour led the search. At this time, the bike path did not have any lights to shine the way, so everyone was looking with flashlights. And this was actually so difficult due to the amount of brush here that at about midnight, they called off the search until the morning. The next morning, the response was massive. 15 campus security guards were on the ground along with dozens of police officers from Amherst. Bloodhounds and helicopters were brought in, and as they scoured, their hopes were high. But at about 5 p.m., those hopes were crushed when the body of Linda was found along with the telltale signs that the bike path rapist had now turned into a killer. 11 days later, the Amherst police received a call from a resident who wanted to report some suspicious activity that he had seen. This man, Bob, worked at the American Brass Factory, which was very close to the Ellicott Creek Bike Path. And here I have found 2 different versions of the information that he provided. One version of this story is that Bob would take breaks to walk on the path, and one day he saw his coworker, Al Sanchez. Bob knew that Al sometimes walked to work and home, and he noticed that Al was walking in the opposite direction of his home. He thought this was weird enough to say something to Al, who acted like he didn't even know Bob. Then, later at work, Bob again approached Al and was like, "Hey, what's going on here?" And Al told him that his wife, Kathleen, had been taking classes at the University of Buffalo, and he had been walking to go visit with her. So the conversation was dropped until the description of the bike path killer was released 11 days later. The second version of this story that I have seen floated around was that Bob was driving home when he saw Al driving in the lane next to him. Similarly, he knew that Al lived in the opposite direction, but figured that he was going to the gym where the workers had memberships that was nearby. But instead of pulling into the parking lot for the gym, Al kept driving until he reached the parking lot for the bike path, at which point Al turned into the parking lot, and again, the description of the bike path killer was released, jogging Bob's memory. Either way, police began looking at Al. He had a clean record, though his car was the same description as a prior sexual assault, and they also found that Kathleen was not attending classes at the university. As they dug in further, they realized that every attack took place on a day that Al had been working and had either been scheduled overtime, which he clocked out for, or on days where he had been late. meaning that while Al had been supposed to be at work during the time of these crimes, he had not been. The time frame fit, and so 32-year-old Al Sanchez became the prime suspect. Following him, police observed him for a while, and when Al did not do anything to indicate that he was a criminal, they started to pursue other leads. 4 months later, they would ask Al to come in to answer just a few questions, and during the interview, Al was visibly nervous. But the police failed to get any DNA because they never asked for it. And this could have solved the case. Instead, they asked all the other suspects for DNA, but not Al. They did get his fingerprints, though, and compared them to some of the fingerprints that they found on Linda's water bottle. There was no match. And just like that, Al was pulled from the suspect list, and police were back to square one. They tried having a female officer pose as a runner to see if they could induce an attack while more police hid in the bushes, and she wore a neck guard to protect her. They questioned every single man on the bike path who resembled the killer. They sent dozens of DNA samples for analysis to see if it matched the DNA found on Linda. Again, of course it wouldn't because they never got Al's DNA. 2,000 tips came in after Linda's case was shown on America's Most Wanted, and still they had nothing. Well, they didn't quite have nothing. They knew that this man would hide in the bushes waiting for women or a girl or a child to come by. He was looking for someone attractive enough to catch his attention, someone who was alone and far away from others, and someone who was distracted enough that they wouldn't notice him as they passed by, that they wouldn't notice as he stepped out behind them, ran up to them, and then tossed the rope around their neck. And with so much public focus on finding Linda's killer, Al decided that he would have to be more careful. And the first step to doing this was to just not attack anyone for a while. This is known as a cooling off period and is often found when people are living two lives, much like Al was. He led this family man, hardworking life with his family, and yet when he stepped out onto the bike path, he became a monster. He didn't completely stop what he was doing. He began using sex workers to chase his high and was arrested in May of 1991 by an undercover police officer. When the charges were reduced to loitering, he just paid the fine and went back to what he was doing. But now he only communicated with women who he had previously used. But this didn't satisfy him for long. His ugly side was about to rear its ugly head. On October 30th, 1992, Al called sex worker Majane Mazur. She was 32 years old and was regularly contacted by Al. At 11 p.m., she hopped into his car, and $40 later, they were having sex in the back seat when what he claims was a spontaneous sensation came over him. He claims it was spontaneous, yet he came prepared. In the back seat with him was a plastic bag and a rope in his pocket. During the act, Al pulled a bag over Majane's head, and when she fought back, he got angry, pulled the rope from his pocket, wrapped it around her neck, over top of the bag, and pulled the rope tight. And then he watched as she died. Al then dumped her body in an industrial area where he buried her beneath some trash and a large piece of fiberglass, adding several rocks, plastic, and bags of trash to make it seem like a pile of discarded items. And just like he had figured, 2 days later, when Majane's boyfriend reported her missing, the police did not make the sex worker's disappearance a high priority. It would take 3 weeks and a flower collector to find Majane. This collector was looking for rare flowers and found a body instead. And the attacks continued again, after a cooling-off period. The next attack was a 14-year-old girl whom he raped near a junkyard on October 19th, 1994. A 5K was held on September 29th, 1996, with more than 1,500 runners showing up to remember Linda and to support the fight for safety of runners everywhere. Every year, more than 1,000 people sign up for this race, and still, in 1996, there was one odd addition to the race. Al himself was signed up for the race and at the starting line. 10 years later, on September 29th, 2006, he attacked 45-year-old Joan Driver on the Clarence Bike Path while she was running. She fought back, scratching his face in the process and struggling. This time, even though Al had pulled her shorts down, he didn't rape Joan. He only murdered her. And we are going to talk more about that in a later episode because she is also a runner who was murdered. So as the years passed, DNA testing was getting better, and police were able to conclusively link victims to the same attacker. But with Joan, even though he hadn't raped her, they found a single drop of usable sweat in her vehicle. Again, we're going to cover that in a later season. This bead of sweat linked Joe to the bike path killer. And with all of this stuff happening, police finally realized that maybe Anthony, the man that they put in prison, was not the person that they had been looking for. On December 4th, 2006, the DNA suggested that they were looking for a Latino man, which was more than anything that they had to go on previously. Another agent suggested that it seemed like he would be a frequent customer of sex workers. So with this information, they started trying to gather information, cross-checking names provided with arrest history. And in addition to this, they decided to go talk to Wilfredo Caraballo again. This time, they asked him for DNA. He said no, but his brother, Herberto Sanchez Caraballo, said yes. And they found that though his DNA was not a match, he was related to the bike path killer. This led them to Al Sanchez once again. They followed him everywhere, trying to find the perfect time to collect something that he ate or drank from to collect DNA. And when in January 2007, they finally got it, it was time to arrest Al when they got the positive match. On January 15th, 2007, Al was arrested with little fuss, though he continued to claim his innocence. That is, until his DNA was linked to so many crimes, at which point he folded like a deck of cards and agreed to plead guilty. Finally, after more than 25 years, the culprit of many women's worst nightmares had been captured and removed from the streets. New York at the time had a statute of limitations on rape, which was only 5 years. So you had to file a complaint within 5 years of the rape, otherwise the person would not be tried in the court of law. More than 5 years, more than 10 years actually, had lapsed between his last rape and when he was arrested. But he had also murdered women. Though he could not be brought to justice for all of these women he brutally attacked and left alive, he was sentenced to 75 years to life in prison on August 14th, 2007. Judge Christopher Burns gave him the maximum sentence, telling him, quote, "You showed no mercy and you deserve none." At the same time, the state of New York was exonerating Anthony for spending 22 years behind bars for crimes he did not commit. The state paid him $4.25 million for the wrongful imprisonment. Al Sanchez died on September 22, 2023 at the age of 65. He had been held in a maximum security correctional facility in Alden. He was taken to Millard Fillmore Suburban Hospital after he was found unresponsive in his cell with a self-inflicted wound on his arm. Linda Yalem's safety run was a huge event for many years, but due to a decline in participation, the race was discontinued in 2018. The hope to help promote personal safety and community was a success, while also pulling many people into the activity. They promoted going for walks and runs with someone, being aware of your surroundings, and taking extra precautions when you are somewhere new. While I know, as well as many of you know, this is not always possible, I do agree to be aware of your surroundings at all times. Keep an eye out for exit strategies. Think through what you would do if someone attacked you. With technology today, do you have your location shared to anyone, or is your watch set with a feature to send out an SOS? It is not only people out there that would cause us to have an emergency. Everything should be considered, and I hope that you get out there anyways. Thank you for listening. Be safe. We will talk again next week. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.